Dear friends, now the second today's lecture is from again Tanuvas, Chennai, and Dr. D. Sumati is the speaker today. She is going to present on the recent approaches in diagnosis and therapeutic management of the neurological disorders in canines. Definitely, this is also one of the important segments as far as the management of the canines are concerned. So, welcome, Dr. Sumati, madam. I have already met you during your CAST training program. You were the coordinator, and again, after a long time, we are meeting here. So, welcome on this platform of the MAP2 and of the PGIVS Akola in this training program. So, on behalf of all the coordinators, I welcome you. So, in short, I will give brief introduction about Madam. Dr. D. Sumati did her PhD in veterinary clinical medicine, and Madam is working as assistant professor at the Department of Veterinary Clinical Medicine, Madras Veterinary College, Tanuvas, Chennai. Madam is specialized in the field of the small animal internal medicine, especially in the gastroenterology and hepatology, small animal ultrasonography. I still remember the memories of the performing ultrasonography very wonderfully during our CAF training program. She also have good hand in the small animal critical care, small animal dermatology, and has a postgraduate diploma in regenerative medicine. Madam has been coordinator for PG diploma in two subjects from 2011 to 2015. In her service tenure of 15 years, she has spent 10 years in research, 13 years in extension related work in clinical areas, and has been involved for 15 years in improving her knowledge. Madam is the co-organizing secretary in international workshop on working dogs in 2014. She has been the course director for the ICAR staff in 2014 when I visited Chennai for the 21 days training program. Madam has also acted as a nodal officer for the Indian Immunological Training in the year 2014. She has successfully published 50 research papers till now, 8 of them being international. She has guided 5 MSc students, 1 PhD students, and acted as a member of 5 MSc and 2 PhD students. She is a proud recipient of the ISM Appreciation Award, 2 Best Clinical Article Award, and 6 Best Clinical Case Presentation Award. So this is the very wonderful speaker today we have got and having the wide clinical exposure. So welcome, madam. I request you to start your presentation, please.
Thank you, Jose sir. I'm very grateful to be among one of the panelists. Very big peep in the panel, and I'm being included. I'm very honored. I'm very thankful to the dean, Sunil sir, as well as Jose, who had been in touch with me regularly. I also thank Dr. Satish, who put me through it, Satish from Hyderabad. I also thank all my colleagues and panelists who are here to present, and I wish them all the best. Can I proceed to share the screen, sir? Because we are already. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, madam. Yes.
Can I proceed to share my?
Yes. You can share your screen.
Okay. Able to see, sir?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. Very good evening to one and all the participants over here. It's a very interesting topic and very challenging topic being given to me to handle, and it contains various areas to be covered. So I'll be on a quick process. If you have any doubts, you post it on the chat line so that we will be able to answer it at the end of the session. So the topic given to me is recent approaches in the diagnosis and therapeutic management of neurological disorders in canines. Nervous system, unlike other body system, is comprised of triad subparts that typically have neuroanatomical and neurophysiological functions. Localizing the problem is very difficult. So very difficult important and you need to do it meticulously, patiently, spending more time on it. So there is one condition which is called as neurophobia. Neurophobia is fear of neural science and clinical neurology, which most of us veterans do have it. Whether you accept it or not, I'm for sure most of us we have it. So it is among the veterinary practitioners mostly, either in the college or in the private sector. We are little hesitant to go about and do certain things. So basically, either we find it difficult to do the examination or we do it here and there and stop, not meticulously doing it complete examination. Or you get a fear, we directly refer it to an expert. Okay. For example, sometimes practitioners do refer it to the colleges, having done it halfway through it. The junior vets refer it to the senior vets, looking for a specialist to handle such cases. So basically, you need to avoid this neurophobia. You need to learn slowly and get into it. Keep doing each day. General overall anatomy, we have two parts. One is central system and the peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system has brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system has your cranial nerves and spinal nerves. So I'll just slowly do the proper areas. So you have in the cranial nerves, you have sensory part, motor part, and autonomic. Spinal nerves, again, you have sensory, motor, and autonomic. So this is a bisected canine brain. This is being obtained from one of the universities. So this is a beautiful image. You could see the bisected canine brain, which is divided into 5 divisions. So here you can see the telencephalon, that is a forebrain, diencephalon, which is also included into the forebrain, which I also do have a separate slide. So mesencephalon, the midbrain, myelencephalon, the medulla oblongata, you also have the pons. So metencephalon, that is the cerebellum, and the pons, that is this is cerebellum and this is pons. So why is this very, very important? The forebrain has your cranial nerves, olfactory, and the optic. Okay, so the olfactory and the optic cranial nerves are from your forebrain. So any cross in the olfactory and the optic nerve, you should think about the forebrain division. Midbrain, you have the third and the fourth cranial nerve, that is going to be your vestibulocochlear. And in case of hindbrain, that is your pons and cerebellum, medulla oblongata, you have most of your cranial nerves, starting from your 5th to your 12th cranial nerves or from your hindbrain. So hindbrain is very, very important, okay, for the cranial nerves. So major part of your cranial nerves are from this area. Coming to the another way of subdividing this one is like you have a cerebrum, cerebellum, and the brainstem. Brainstem is nothing but your mesencephalon, pons, and medulla oblongata. So you also term it as all the 3 together as brainstem. The diencephalon and your telencephalon both together, you call it as the cerebrum. So what are all the functions of the forebrain? So forebrain has your frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and your temporal lobe. So mainly it is associated with the behaviors. So your behavior related changes, you need to think about your forebrain vision. There is the occipital lobe, wherein which the vision is important. Parietal lobe, the sensory information from the skin, skeletal muscles are traveled to the parietal lobe. And the auditory part, hearing part, goes into your auditory area. So these areas are very, very important, and this is included in the forebrain. Coming to the midbrain. So what is the midbrain? Your mesencephalon. So what is the cranial nerve here? Cranial nerve 3, that is the oculomotor. Cranial nerve 4, the trochlea. So what is that is going to display here is your movement of the eye, your all things that is related to the eye is going to be in the midbrain. So midbrain is going to be related to your eye movement, either strabismus, deviation, everything. So here you get two cranial nerves, that is your cranial nerve 3 and cranial nerve 4. So coming to the pons, you get the cranial nerve 5, that is the trigeminal part of the ophthalmic, maxillary and mandibular. Any lesion in the pons, you will get the tone of the facial areas that is being affected. Okay, so facial dysymmetry, loss of sensation in the facial areas, and all those things are going to be the lesions is going to be located in the pons. Apart from that, consciousness, respiration, and bladder function. Bladder function, importantly, your upper motor neuron function. So what is upper motor neuron? Go into it when we go to the other slide. So coming to the medulla, as I told, most of your cranial nerves are from the medulla. That is going to be from your cranial nerve 6 to 12 and your respiratory center. Cerebellum, it is important to know about the rate, range, direction, and force of motor movement. Ataxia, either hypermetria, dysmetria, or asymmetria. Intentional tremors, I have got few videos of it. Then paradoxical vestibular syndrome, decerrate rigidity, we have a picture of it. So we do get these kind of changes when the cerebellum is affected. So this is about a little bit about the spinal cord. We'll go into the spinal cord proper. You divide the spinal cord into various portions, that is P1 to P5, P6 to T2, P3 to L3, L4 to S1, and S1 to areas. So these have a different set of functions to your limb. Okay, so that we'll go out when you are going into the reflex. Just I wanted to know you that there are segments P1 to P5, P6 to P2, P3 to L3, L4 to S1, and S1 to your cord. So coming to the spinal cord is one step ahead of your vertebrae. So when you see the vertebrae is C1, but your is in little cranial. So every part of your spinal cord is going to be cranial to your vertebrae. So that you just keep it in mind. Because when you are evaluating, you should not correlate it with your vertebrae. So what are all the tracts of the spinal cord? You have a ascending tract and your descending tract. Ascending tracts are going to be sensory and your descending tracts are going to be motor. So don't think it's going to be a big thing to remember. So sensory is you're going to be your touch, proprioception, your pain, temperature, everything is going to be in your ascending tract. And descending tract is going to be your motor functions. So like your voluntary limb movements, all those things are going to be in your descending tract of your spinal cord. So what is a gray matter? You have a gray matter, you have a white matter. Gray matter is the neuronal bodies. It has neutrophils, astrocytes, dendrites, you've got glial cells, all those things which are in the gray matter. So those cells which are not myelinated are also in the gray matter. White matter has myelinated axons. So coming to the parasympathetic and the sympathetic areas, your cranial nerve 3, 7, 9, and 10 has a parasympathetic pathway. S1 to S3 has your parasympathetic pathway. So remember, your parasympathetic pathway is going to be in your third, 7th, 9th, and 10th, and S1 to S3. Coming to your sympathetic pathway, it is going to be in the thoracolumbar, that is T1 to L4. So what is just a general look at what is the sympathetic and parasympathetic is going to do, because when we deal on Horner syndrome, we get to know these things. So what does the sympathetic part and the parasympathetic part does? For example, in case of eye, the sympathetic causes dilatation, the parasympathetic causes constriction. Heart, sympathetic increases the heart rate, decreases the heart rate. So it goes on like that. So you have a sympathetic pathway and you have the parasympathetic pathway. So we were talking about upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron. So we had been talking 4 slides ahead about upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron. So the upper motor neuron is situated in the brain. Okay, so the upper motor neuron has its neuron located in the brain or in the brain stem, and the axon travels down the spinal cord. Okay, so it innervates as alpha and it innervates as alpha and gamma motor neurons in the ventral horns. So from the ventral horns, you get the lower motor neurons, which directly innervates the muscle. So what all the clinical signs which are going to associated if there is going to be any issues with this upper motor neuron or lower motor neuron? So upper motor neuron, you always think it is going to be up or more. Lower motor neuron is going to be low or less. So remember, these are going to be the signs. If you are going to say about UMN signs, LMN signs, you just, if they say UMN signs, close your eyes, you can tell everything is going to be more. LMN signs, everything is going to be less. So what is that is going to happen is more muscle contraction, so you're going to get spasticity. Muscle tone is increased, so you're going to get hypertonicity. Muscle reflexes is going to be hyperreflexia. So there is going to be a atrophy, which is going to be a diffuse atrophy. When coming to lower motor neuron, the muscle contraction is flaccid, muscle tone, hypotonicity, muscle reflexes, hyporeflexia. Loss of innervation is going to cause atrophy. It is not diffuse atrophy in case of lower motor neuron. It is only because of the innervations that are lost. Okay. So in humans, they have only one test to do it quickly. What they do is your Babinski sign. So Babinski is like when you slightly do a sensations on your toe, the toe points up. So this is being done in dogs. So the toe points up. It is going to be a upper motor neuron. So toe points down, though it doesn't happen in pets, it happens in humans. So toe points up, it tells you a positive Babinski, so it is going to be a upper motor neuron sign. So coming to the history, physical examination and diagnostic and treatment, we go it in different conditions. So what are all the different types of problems in breed related is going to be like intervertebral disc disease is going to happen in Dachshund. So if a Dachshund comes with a problem in the spinal areas, you need to think might be it is having IVDD. Inflammatory brain diseases, mostly Maltese, Yorkshire Terriers, Chihuahua, and your Pomeranians, pugs tend to have inflammatory brain disease. Epilepsy, quite common in German Shepherds and Golden Retrievers. Hydrocephalus, Pomeranians, and pugs, quite common. So coming to Maltese, lately I saw in the news, people are more moving towards the purchase of Maltese in Delhi areas. So the clients must be aware that dog might have or might develop an brain disease. So young animals, usually you get a congenital or your infectious diseases. Aged dogs, you get degenerative neoplasms. Sex is not of much significance in case of brain diseases. Coming to clues, when you are going to do a diagnosis of a brain disease, you look for a time and the clinical signs. So here, trauma, there is acute onset of clinical signs, which is going to stay very steep and drop down. Infectious is next to it. Anomaly is a straight line, like it is going to be there and it is going to be there. It's going to be there until the animal is going to death. So neoplasia is going to be little deeper in scale depending upon the status of the carcinomatosis. And degenerative, it is like slowly progresses with the animal. So by this, you will get a little bit of clue in making a diagnosis. So you already know damage V type of classification in case of neurological diseases. I just wanted to put it here. So coming to things that you look for a mental status. So mental status, normally it should be bright, alert, everything. If there is going to be a depression, or if there is going to be a delirium, if there is going to be a coma or a stupor, you need to think about various diseases. So if there is going to be a depression or obtundation, stupor or coma, it is going to be a severe diffuse brain disease. Delirium, that is overactive, or it inappropriately acts for the situation, then it is going to be a forebrain dysfunction. Coming to behavior changes, for instance, house training you have done in a dog and he doesn't do it, so there is a loss in the learned habit. So there is going to be a forebrain disorder. So the animal does some problem at home, is going to do a house training. You should not hold the animal, but look for him if he is having any problem. Then head pressure. It is also one of the behavioral changes. Inability to recognize. Owner calls and he is unable to recognize things, then it's also a forebrain disorder. There is another one which is called as hemi-neglect syndrome, or also known as hemi-inattention syndrome. So there is going to be a lesion in the forebrain. The contralateral side, that is the opposite side, is affected. You can see the video. So this is called as a hemi-neglect. Hope you are able to see the video. So the animal eats to one side of the plate. He moves on. He doesn't know the other half of the plate. So the lesion is in the other side of the brain. So this is hemi-neglect. Is the video played, sir? Hello?
Yeah, it was playing.
Okay, thank you, sir. So this is posture and body position. So you will tend to have a head tilt, head turn, wide base stance, decerebrate or decerebellate rigidity, Schiff-Sherrington, lordosis type poses, all these things like body posture and body position. So here you can see in this Dane, it is having a wide base stance. Okay, it's trying to be very cautious, having the legs little wide base. So you see in this, the animal is having a head tilt. So he moves with the head tilt for the owner's call. So he's moving with the head tilt. You can see he has the head tilt. So he moves with the head tilt. So we were talking about decerebrate and decerebellate rigidity. So the first image is the decerebrate rigidity, wherein which you see the forelimbs, hind limbs, both are extended. There is a opisthotonus. Animal does not respond to any call. So there is a opisthotonus. Limbs are extended, diminishes the mental status in case of a problem with the cerebral cortex. This is called as decerebrate posture. Okay. Coming to the lower image, animal is conscious, though it is having opisthotonus, it responds to call, everything. The forelimbs are extended. The hip is flexed. This is very typical for a decerebellate. So here the cerebellum is affected. So the hind limbs are not showing any much changes. So the hip is flexed. Hind limbs are either flexed or extended. It has a normal mental status. So anybody brings an animal to you with this posture, you should not immediately like, what should I do? So just put the animal on the table, look whether it is having a decerebrate rigidity or decerebellate rigidity. So you can localize the lesion immediately. That's why. So gait coming to ataxia, circling, and lameness, paralysis. So here you can see a kitten having ataxia. So abnormal involuntary movements like tremors, circling, head bobbing, myoclonus, repetitive rhythmic contraction of particular group of muscles that you get into the myotonia. Myotonia is delayed in relaxation of the contracted group of muscles. So here you see one of the videos which was sent by a owner. You can see the one mildly attacks it. Here it's almost like a fly catching. So this video has a sequence of other videos which also has tremors. So this is a kind of a fly catching movement in a dog. So ataxia, you know, like it is vestibular ataxia, cerebellar ataxia. You know about paralysis. Paralysis is partial loss of movement. Paralysis is complete involuntary movement loss. The tremors, we talked about intentional tremors, and also you got a shaker dog disease. So here you can see one of the puppy. So he keeps bobbing his head, like he does like this, like this, like this when he's awake. Okay, this is called as an intentional tremors, and when he is sleeping, he's all okay, he's all fine, he doesn't have any tremors. So now he started to sleep and he's all okay, fine. So these are intentional tremors. Here it is like the shaker's dog disease. This is a Maltese breed. You can see the animal is shaking. So even if the animal stands, it will be shaking like this. So coming to Schiff-Sherrington phenomenon. So Schiff-Sherrington phenomenon, we were talking about decerebrate and decerebellate rigidity. Now comes the Schiff-Sherrington. So Schiff-Sherrington is a very tricky situation wherein which the lesion is in the thoracolumbar spine. The lesion is in the posterior part, so the forelimbs should be normal, but here the forelimbs are not normal. Okay? The hind limb should be rigid and forelimbs should be normal. This is because of one particular cell that are borders at the edge of the your gray matter, which carries the signal and then it transports to the forelimb and causing the rigidity. So generally it should not cause a rigidity, but in Schiff-Sherrington there is this border cells that take up the role of a upper motor neuron. So upper motor neuron, you know, it is going to be, everything is going to be more. So this border cells will take up the role of upper motor neuron. So here this very tricky situation sometimes for you to understand it unless you have a proper history. Sometimes most of the NGOs, they bring the dog at any stages, which will be very difficult for you to evaluate because they don't have a history. So coming to another thing, this is Horner syndrome. So here you get ptosis of the upper eyelid, prolapse of the third eyelid. You get meiosis of the affected pupil. You also got enophthalmos. So here, I'll just proceed to the next slide. You need to check whether the animal is blind. Okay. So how do you check if the animal is blind? So you go for a pupillary reflex. So does the animal's pupil dilate in the dark? Animal will not be blind in Horner syndrome. The pupil, the smaller pupil dilate in the dark. It doesn't dilate. The normal pupil dilates. If the larger pupil constricts, it doesn't constrict. Okay. The affected pupil will constrict. So is there any other signs of oculomotor nerves? You just need to look for the facial asymmetry and other things. So these are a few of the Horner's disease. You can see meiosis of the eye. So here you can see meiosis, and this is a dilated eye. Here also you can see the dilated eye. So there are various reasons for this one. We'll just skip the reasons because we have a very short time. How do you evaluate this one? Is like you go with application of cocaine or phenylephrine or hydroxyamphetamine, and then look for confirmation of the Horner. Okay, so by this we can able to diagnose whether it is postsynaptic or it is like post ganglionic or pre-ganglionic. So that is again, it is a detailed thing, and because we have few other things to go. So what is the treatment for it? Because the third eyelid protrusion is there, will affect the vision. The treatment for it is 1% or 10% phenylephrine is the treatment. So coming to forebrain, we just know like there is going to be a motor, visual, sensory, and emotional, as well as seizures. Coming to brainstem, you're going to have your cranial nerve deficits and long track signs. You also have cerebellum, intentional tremors, which we saw a video, dysmetria, as well as in coordination of the learned motor control. So what are all the things you need to do is you need to do various neurological examinations. So you know what all the tests to be done. Olfactory, you know, like you go for smell, noxious stimuli. Optic, you go for menace, pupillary light. Obstacle test. Obstacle test, don't put something which is really hard. The animal goes in for takes up an injury. Oculomotor, again, you look for the eyeball position. Trochlear, you look for the eyeball position. Trigeminal, you also look for the masticatory muscles, the jaw movements, everything. Abducens, you look for the eyeball position as well as the physiological nystagmus. Facial, you look for the palpebral reflex, that is putting stimulus on the inner centers of the eye. So facial symmetry, you also look for the symmetry here. And vestibulocochlear, you look for the head tilt. So usually it is in the contralateral side. So you go for glossopharyngeal, that is gag. Vagus, again you go for a gag reflex. Hypoglossal, tongue lab, and you inspect the tongue, which is very difficult in our dogs because they're not trained properly. So postural reactions, you know, like paw placements, visual and tactile placing, hopping, wheel burrowing, extension postural test, hemi walking. I have few pictures of it. Proprioception, you do it in all four legs, hemi walking, hopping. Then wheel rowing, you have to do it and lifting the hind limbs. Extension postural thrust and tactile placing, you can either blindfold and do, or you can keep the animal eye open and keep it. So spinal reflexes, basically C1 to C5 is affected. The C1 to C5 cord is the upper motor neuron for the forelimbs as well as for the hind limbs. So it is going, if there is going to be any issues with the C1 and C5 cord, there is going to be quadriparesis, quadriplegia, or human signs that is going to be very stiff, spastic. There is going to be a neck strain. Coming to C6 to T2. C6 to T2 is upper motor neuron for the T1 and other part of the spinal cord, and that is for the your hind limbs, and it is going to be a lower motor neuron for your forelimbs. That is, the forelimbs are going to be normal and your hind limbs are going to be having rigidity. So here there is one thing which they call it as root signature. So if C6 to T2 is affected, so there might be a quadriparesis, the degree of element signs in the forelimbs, that is, you are going to have a flaccid forelimbs, and the hind limbs is going to be rigid. So there is one sign which is called as root signature. You can see in this video, there is going to be a small neck pain. So the animal lifts its forelimbs. So when it moves, it slowly lifts its forelimbs. This is called as root sign. So along with other things, it can also have a root sign. So spinal reflexes, T3 to L3, if it is affected, there is going to be paralysis or paraplegia. So human signs of the back limbs, and there is going to be a back pain. So if there is going to be a spinal cord of L4 to S3 is affected, so element signs of the back legs. So the back legs is going to be flaccid and your forelimbs are going to be absolutely normal. So when the S3 to CD5 is affected, that's the coccygeal cord. So all the lesions are going to be towards the bladder as well as the anal area. So spinal reflexes, you know what are all the spinal reflexes? I just put in biceps, patellar, cranial tibial gastrocnemius, as well as withdrawal reflexes. I just proceed. So these are few reflexes when you do strike the muscles of the biceps, like your bicep brachii muscle and the brachialis muscle should contract. Extensor carpi, so the carpus should extend. So you go with various spinal reflexes because we have things to go. I just skip the spinal reflexes. So this, because this is a recent advances in diagnostic techniques in neurological diseases, we have CT versus MRI. So the best one is MRI in case of neurological diseases. So here they use X-rays in CT, whereas the MRI uses a magnetic field. In CT, you have one plane. In case of MRI, you have various different planes. It's good for non-calcified areas. CT is good for the calcified areas. So as I told, CT is viewed in transverse plane. Here you see it in transverse, sagittal, dorsal. You can use contrast agent. Here iodine and barium is used, so you need to be very cautious. So here they use a gadolinium. So gadolinium is the contrast agent in MRI. So if there is going to be a calcified disc, then you can go with CT. If you're going to look for a tissue changes, then you have to go for MRI in case of spinal cord. So for example, this is the image of tympanic bullae. So here you see, hope I able to see. Here you see a tympanic bullae. So you are unable to see details inside this CT image. So the left side of your screen is CT image, the right side is the MRI. So in MRI, you are able to see there is some kind of hyperintense areas. So this indicates that there is the bullae has some kind of infection. So coming to brain and related structures on an MRI, bone is going to look dark black. That is, there are two things, T1 weighted and T2 weighted. Hair, dark black in both. Muscle, dark gray in both. White matter, light gray and dark gray. Gray matter, dark gray and light gray. Just we'll go with some images. So here, it is a T1 weighted. Here, the white matter appears white, and the neurons of the gray matter appear gray. So white matter is white and the gray matter is gray. Okay, so the middle one is CSF, which is looking dark. So here it is T2 weighted. Here you see the white matter appears gray and the gray matter appears white, and your CSF also looks white. Okay, there is another one terminology which is used in MRI, that is fluid attenuated inversion recovery. So this gives more importance and more detailing in case of your gray matter and your white matter. Here also your CSF appears dark. So you get more detailing of this when you are going to attenuate the fluid. So coming to T1 versus T1 with contrast. Here you are seeing a T1 weighted. This is a common one. When you apply contrast, you are able to see the blood vessels. That is small white areas which are arrowed with your red arrows. So this is not seen in your T1 weighted. So when there is going to be a brain injury, trauma, where there is going to be bleeding in the vessels, so this contrast will help in evaluating the damaged blood. So here there is one small white area which is acute infarction. So as I told, in T1 weighted, the CSF looks dark, and T2 weighted, the CSF is going to look bright, because we are going to use a few of the images coming down. So balance, vestibular diseases. So you know how it goes on, because if there is an inner ear problem or there is a cerebellum problem, you get a peripheral vestibular disease or a central vestibular disease, because the process will be through your vestibulocochlear. So there is going to be signs like head tilt, circling, nausea, rolling down, nystagmus, tremors, corners, sometimes hypermetria, hypometria. There are various reasons for it. So here we see one of the image of MRI, wherein which you have a vesicochlear nerve which is very prominently seen on an MRI, which is not possible in your CT. So this vestibulocochlear nerve shows a prominence. So you have a facial nerve and a vestibulocochlear nerve, which is very prominent. So here you see there is a nerve enhancement. So this will give you a clue whether there is an inflammation of the particular nerve. So coming to your enhancement after your contrast. So you can see the brightness of the previous image. You can see it is little grayish in your contrast. So you are able to see the nerve. So coming to your symphonic delay. So any accumulation can also be visualized in your MRI. So you'll be able to see certain accumulation. So it is not seen only in your CT images. So this will give you a clue to whether to go for a surgical option or not. So here it is one of the case which came with a vestibular disease. So this is now on your medication. So there are a lot of ways to make an examination. You do your otoscopic examination, you do a biochemical plans, you do all your tests. So what is the treatment? So if there is going to be a seizure episode, then you put them on a diazepam. Azithromycin if the animal is very difficult to handle. So the drugs which we use in this case is meclizine. Meclizine like 0 to 5 kg, it is 6.25 milligram per oral. So 8 hourly or once a day. 6 to 20 milligram you use with double the dose, and above 20 milligram you dose double. So there are various medications that are available in the market, like your anti-vert, calm. You have a lot of drugs. So hydrocephalus, this one puppy with hydrocephalus. You have a puppy with hydrocephalus. So coming to hydrocephalus, hydrocephalus is going to be two ways. One is obstructive, another one is compensatory. Compensatory is because of brain parenchyma stream. There is in case of any senile diseases like that. So compensatory, the CSF volume gets increased. Here, the intracranial pressure is normal. So in obstructive hydrocephalus, there is the outflow is obstructed. It might be because of your narrowing of the areas, like I'll show you which one. So mesencephalic aqueduct gets narrowed. Second one is arachnoid villi, which absorbs the CSF, it doesn't do the function, or if there is improper blood supply to the brain, the blood vessels which also absorbs the CSF gets stopped. So you should also think about improving the blood flow to the brain. So here you can see there is a narrowing of the mesencephalic aqueduct. So this will be a little big. The red arrow shows this. So this is one of the MRI image. So this is very good when you look in an MRI. So this is T1 weighted and this is T2 weighted. As I told, in T1 weighted, your CSF looks gray or dark. In T2 weighted, the CSF looks bright. So this is the difference between the T1 weighted and T2 weighted with regard to CSF. So here you also see again, here the lateral ventricles. Here you also see the third ventricle. So here you see the lateral ventricles, third ventricle, and fourth ventricle that are distended because there is a hypothalamus. So here this is a CT image. So the detailing is not seen. You see the lateral ventricles, and this is again one more CT. You are unable to get the details. So medical management, you go with dexamethasone, 0.2 milligrams. So dexamethasone is, if you feel that there is a side effect, then you can go with prednisolone at the dose rate of 0.5 mg to 1 mg. It can be given once a day or twice a day, and then gradually decrease the dose. The other one is you go for mannitol, 0.2 to 1 gram per kg. So mannitol has a lot of advantages when you use it. So the disadvantage is like there is you need to add an IV fluid. Advantage is like it also improves the blood volume and blood supplies to the brain increase so that the CSF absorption by the blood vessels is enhanced. So coming to other diuretics, you can go with furosemide at 0.5 milligram to 2 to 4 milligram. You can go. So it can be divided into 2 doses. And other one is acetazolamide. This is also a diuretic that can help in the reduction of CSF production. So this can also be used at 10 milligram per kg. Coming to seizures, you can use your anticonvulsants like phenobarbital, potassium bromide, levetiracetam, your gabapentin. So you can also go with ventricular shunting things, which we commonly don't do it here. So this is one of the shuntings, that ventricular peritoneal shunt. Here is the ventricular atrial shunt. So this image shows you how it is anchored into the CSF. There is a ventricular catheter, proximal catheter. There is a valve which controls. There is a distal catheter. This distal catheter moves either into the atrium or into the peritoneum. So this is an X-ray. This is an ultrasound. So your plain X-ray doesn't give any much detail except for the fluid shadow. So this is your lateral ventricle, left and right, in an ultrasound. So this is shaking puppy. So you can see this one is like it happens. If you leave the puppy like this, it will automatically come back to normal within 6 months of age. So this is another one which we call intentional tremors. So this is cerebellar hypoplasia. So here also you don't have any treatment. This progresses and sometimes the animal may die after 6 months. Sometimes the animals survive with the lesions, but most often they don't survive. So here we saw this is a Maltese breed with a shaking disease. So this one very well pure serum. Here CD, I don't want to go with this CD video. So here just get a teaching. So most often homeopathic treatment is what we try. Infectious, we also have rabies, which you know. So inflammatory conditions, just move on. So it is granulomatous meningoencephalitis, that is meningoencephalitis of origin. They are classified into GME and NE. So you also have steroid responsive diseases, idiopathic tremor syndrome. You also have a lot of other things. Like I'll just proceed with this one. Here, the very particular thing which you get is the mononuclear inflammatory cell infiltrates perivascular cuffing, which is very typical in histopathology. So that clinician may not be helpful. There are different forms like focal, disseminated, that is multifocal, or sometimes even ocular forms. These are a few of the images, videos of the dogs with the GMEs. This is German Shepherd. Most often you get in breeds. So you see how the animal is having tremors and shaking. So here you can see there is a nystagmus. In this video, you can see the nystagmus. The owners are trying to calm down the animal. So this is the ocular form. You usually have variable degrees of optic edema. We also have retinitis. So clinical signs, you know, like we have seen, she's of depression, ataxia, gait abnormalities. It has tremors, all those things. Diagnosis, blood test can be done. It has a moderate to mild leukocytosis. Basic thing which you are supposed to do is CSF tap. So CSF tap, how you do is like your occipital protuberance and the atlanta, the rings of the atlas. So this should make a intersection. So just little above it or at the intersection you can do. So just see the image video. You are not supposed to draw a line like this. Just to show you the landmark, we are drawing a line. Ring atlas and the occipital protuberance to draw a line. So now you can insert spinal needle or 1.5 inch your 20 gauge 1.5 inch needles also can insert. So you can see a video. So it is a very clear fluid you are getting into it. So usually you collect it in a test tube. Here I'm using a Eppendorf tube. So this is the collected CSF. So it is a very clear fluid. So it's a normal CSF composition. So white cells, it should be, that is, you have two CMS and lumbar puncture, cerebellum medullary system and lumbar system. So you get less than 5 cells per microliter. Here also you get less than 5 cells per microliter. You should not have a red blood cells. If you have red blood cells, it is contaminated. CSF tap is very, very easy. If you try to do it in most of the cases, you will be able to do it. Nothing a problem. You just need to take a consent from the owner. So just try to do it in 1 or 2 cases, because it's going to be a very important decision making tool in case of your inflammatory condition. So here you get abnormal cell count, RBS is present. It might be a contamination, or it might be intrathecal hemorrhage. So elevated WBCs. So type of WBCs you have to evaluate. So mononuclear pleocytosis, viral or immune mediated. Neutrophilic pleocytosis, then you have to get whether the neutrophils are healthy, whether there is a degenerative neutrophil. So if it is going to be a neutrophil, healthy neutrophil, it can be necrotic venous tumor, or it can be immune mediated disease, or it can be, if it is going to be a degenerative and toxic neutrophils, it can be any kind of a bacterial meningitis, abscess, necrosis, or your enemies. Eosinophilic, you get parasitic fungal or eosinophilic meningoencephalomyelitis. Lymphoblast you see in lymphocytes. So here you see the white arrows. You just see the white arrows. These white arrows are the pleocytosis. The rest of the things are normal. So here, what is important of MRI in this image is, so the first one is affected dog. The second one is a normal dog. So you can see how the sulci are beautifully placed in case of a normal dog. So the detailing is absent in case of the dogs with inflammatory diseases. So the sulci are absent. So here you see there is a small inflammatory areas which is pointed with the arrow, which is slightly hyper intense. So here this side is normal, this side it is hyper intense. So it can be a focal. So what is the treatment? There are lots of treatments that are available, but the most significant one is your prednisolone. So apart from prednisolone, you have cytosine arabinoside. You also have cyclosporins, which can be used. You can use azathioprine. You can go with radiation. You can also go with drugs like your cyclophosphamide, vincristine, and prednisolone. That is your CHOP protocol can be followed in case of if it is lymphocytic. So mycophenolate mofetil is also being used. So control agents like lomustine can also be used. Lefunomide, this is also being used in case of inflammatory because of your lymphocytes. Okay, so procarbazine, this is also used if there is weakness in specific conditions. Then coming to stroke, there are going to be two things. One is clot formation, another one is leakage. So this is the intricate blood supply of the brain. So this can be a lot of reasons for your stroke, like your fibrocartilaginous embolism, or there can be a arteriosclerosis, there can be diabetes, septic thromboembolism, so parasitic migration. So there can be a lot of reasons for ischemic stroke. So I'm just getting into the images. Hemorrhagic stroke, most often in humans you get because of hypertensive. Here also you get hypertensive as one of the cases. So you have to have the BP checked properly. So here you see hyperintense area. So here that area is little darker. So you have infarct here. So this is microvascular bleeding. This is a gross pathology. This is an MRI image. So you can see the spotted areas. So just very typical to your, I don't know, the slides are skipping. So this is a microvascular bleeding. So here the edema. So edema is being shown as hyperintense area in the first one. And in the second one, there is an arrow mark which is given. So there is a little bit of grayish areas. And here you can see the area is more high intense. So this is a edema in the brain. So ischemic stroke, again, you have a hypointense areas. Here you have a hyperintense areas. These are also your MRLE. So how do you go with this one? Is like you have to go with thrombolytic agents which are used in human medicines, like your streptokinase. You can go with hypertonic sternoids. You can go with mannitol. So you need to necessarily go for oxygen support. BP has to be controlled with your enalapril or your amlodipine. So if it is going to be chronic, there is one which is called as recon tissue plasminogen activator. So that can be tried. Antithrombolytics can be used. So you can use clopidogrel. So this drug is available for usage in dogs. That is 1 milligram per kg, once a day dosing. So this is reported to be very good in case of thromboembolic disorders in case of dogs and cats. So aspirin can also be tried, but you need to be cautious when you are using in animals. So status epilepticus, you know what is status epilepticus? It is going to be more than 5 minutes. So you have a lot of physical diagnosis. I had attended to the lecture. There was also one question by one of the person whether we need to go for intranasal or intranasal route. So I have an answer for you here. So just I skip to this directly. So sometimes your benzodiazepam doesn't work just like that. Okay. So what you do is you go for different routes of administration. So what are the different routes of administration is like you just go with intranasal midazolam as a choice. If you have you don't have an IV aspirin, so you go for an internal midazolam. So next one is your rectal diazepam. So you can go for rectal diazepam. This is like when you don't have an IV aspirin. Okay. So what is the use when you are going to use an intranasal midazolam? So intranasal midazolam, there are ways it can act. So it can directly get into the circulation through the nasal mucosa. It directly gets into the circulation, enters into the blood-brain barrier, and enters into the brain. So other way is like it directly enters into the nasal mucosa. It goes via the nerve and reaches the brain very quickly. This is the indirect pathway, and this is the direct pathway when you are going to use the intranasal. So you can achieve little faster when you are going to use. This is what they are used pediatric patients, and atomizers are used in pediatric patients are available, and you can also use it for our pets. So this is how they use. So dosing, I will just. So this has a dosing. Intranasal midazolam is 0.2 mg per kg using an automated. It is an atomizer. So there is a tip which is being used. And if you are going to use a rectal diazepam, it is going to be 1 milligram per kg. Okay. So it is going to be 1 milligram per kg. So you have to wait until the cessation of the seizure. So it is going to be short acting, but at least you will achieve it before you get into the next episode. So how is it being used in humans? So how there is a syringe, there is a needle, there is an atomizer, and there is a drug. So you just use the needle, take the drug, fix the atomizer, make the patient lie down, like either it is a dog or a cat, like make it to lie down. So apply it intranasally on either side. Okay, so you have to apply it on either side. So coming to your anti-epileptic drugs for seizure episodes, there are a lot of drugs that are available and a lot of reasons for your epilepsy. The most favorite drug is your phenobarbital. It can be used as monotherapy or add-on. Potassium bromide, it can be used as monotherapy or it can be used as add-on. But most often we don't go for potassium bromide in case of veterinary patients. Most often in our colleges we don't go, but I heard in RP few of them are using, but I'm not very sure. The potassium bromide can be used. It can be used as a monotherapy or add-on. Imipitoin is not available here for us use, but it is the latest one. It can be used as monotherapy and it can be used as add-on along with your phenobarbital. Another one is levetiracetam. It can be used as monotherapy. It can also be used as add-on. Zonisamide, again, it can be used as monotherapy or it can be used as add-on. So what is the other drugs are available? I just get into the other drugs that are available. So you have phenobarbital, primidone, you have diazepam, which are being used. So there are a lot of drugs that are available which acts on the GABA. So these are these few drugs that are available for your veterinary use. So coming to sodium channel blockade, lamotrigine is being tried in animals and people are using it abroad. It is available with GSK right now. I don't know how is it available with which pharmaceutical. So another one is calcium channel blockade, gabapentin, pregabalin, and zonisamide. So these zonisamide has two effects. It also has sodium channel blockade as well as calcium channel blockade. So these are readily available for use, and the disadvantages few are available as oral therapy. So it will be decided by the veterinarian how we are going to use. So other drugs you have is your levetiracetam. Levetiracetam is taken a very big stand in use in veterinary as a monotherapy as well as combined therapy with your phenobarbital. So felbamate is also being used. Topiramate is also being used. These levetiracetam, topiramate, and felbamate, they have multiple actions. So they act either at sodium channel blockage or GABA potentiation or calcium channel blockage, the NMDA receptor inhibition. So these kind of actions are being carried out by this felbamate, topiramate, and levetiracetam. Levetiracetam acts as the synaptic level. So levetiracetam has an edge over the other anticonvulsive drugs. So apart from that, you have vagal nerve stimulation, acupuncture. Nutrition is like your ketogenic diet, that is fat restricted, high fat diet, low protein and low carbohydrate diet. I think most of you know keto diet and maybe most of you are following. Homeopathy is also being used. So it has been given in your ACVAM consensus. So certain drugs of homeopathy has also been tried, and this can be tried in few of the dogs. So coming to brain tumors, I just get into the MRI images. So these are few brain tumors. So this is a pituitary tumor. This is a cerebral tumor. So this is a meningioma in a cat. So you have a small glioma. So these are hyperintense area on the MRI. So here, oligodendroglioma, this is a gross image. You can see how hyperintense it is in the MRI. So here you also get meningioma. So you can see the gross image and you can compare it with the MRI image. So how hyperintense it is compared to the rest of the brain. So this is again one of the choroid plexus tumor. You can see how it is in the gross, and here it is totally hyper intense. So there are a lot of drugs that are available which are being tried. The success is not known. So some of the drugs is like your lomustine, carmustine are being tried. But I have one of the patients who is on EGFR TKA drugs, that is that is your epidermal growth factor receptor. You know, TK, tyrosine kinase inhibitors are being used successfully in mast cell tumors. Here, these are epidermal growth factor receptor associated TKIs, and here you have again the same lead group. So you get gefitinib, afatinib, icotинib, which are being successfully used in human patients. I have a patient who is being still maintained on one of these drugs, and he is doing well with no much aggravation in the clinical signs. Sometimes you can combine it with doxorubicin. So doxorubicin, if you use it, it is going to be in your glioblastomas or in non-diffuse gliomas. So these are the latest drugs. For example, if there are academicians who can take up this work for their research, they can try in these areas. Practitioners can definitely use it because these are approved drugs for use in dogs. So you can try if you have a confirmation on brain tumors. So coming to spinal cord, I'm just going around with a few of the conditions because you all know, like, these are the few of the reflexes which you do. So we get IVDDs, you get trauma, you get infarction. So coming to the CT versus MRI image. Okay, so this is a CT image, this is an MRI image. So here you don't get detail in case of your CT image compared to your MRI image in case of your intervertebral diseases. So here you can see much detailing. Here you can see much detailing. So here the detailing is not that clear enough in case of CT. If there is going to be a disc prolapse, so your MRI is going to help. So this is one of the dog Dachshund. So you can see the hind limbs that are weak, animal is unable to move. The best treatment is your surgical correction. So I'm not into detail on it. Coming to the Wobbler syndrome. Wobbler syndrome is like is most commonly in dog bands. Okay, so there is going to be neck pain. So here the lesions are shown in your. So there is a bony protuberance over here. So there is going to be a typical neck pain. Here you are going to for an anti-inflammatory medication and physical therapy. So because it is your bone related issues, your CT might help you better detailing in such cases. Coming to discus spondylitis, so it is an inflammatory condition. So you see that there is going to be no much detail or plain is traced. Whereas when you see at your MRI, you can see very detailed degree of changes which are seen in your in the spaces. So this is in the thoracolumbar, this is in the lumbar segment. So you have to go with treatments with antibiotics or antifungal depending upon the cause. So the causes might be Staph, E. coli, Brucella, Aspergillosis, or your Staphylococcus intermediate. So depending upon it, you have to choose your treatment. So coming to your what do you call your spondylosis deferment. So here you see there is a spur formation. So CT is a better one compared to MRI in this case. So your normal X-ray will not give you much of the details. So your CT has given you a better view. So in case bony thing, you can go with your CT. So coming with your diffuse idiopathic skeletal hyperostosis. So here there is a complete bone formation. So this is better seen in your CT compared to your normal. So this is the performation grading you can do. This is spondylosis deferments and this is idiopathic skeletal hyperostosis. So there is full bone formation. So degenerative myelopathy, mostly seen in your German Shepherd dogs. There is weakness, paralysis, wobbliness. So here you see you can go with your drugs. The latest drugs that are being used here is epsilon amino carporoic acid, that is EACA, that is 500 milligram PAD per hour. You can also go with NSL-15, which is also antioxidant. So here mostly as the usage is antioxidants, like you can go with vitamin E, supplements, so along with your exercises. So mostly they concentrate on your antioxidants as a treatment. Prednisolone can be given if the signs are worsening. So fibrocartilaginous embolism is your, this is one of the cases. This animal was playing quite normally and then suddenly it developed a condition. So here you can see there is a hemi. So here the animal is showing a hemiparesis. So here it is you have to wait until the animal gets normal on its own, or sometimes you have to go for a surgical attempt because there is this prolapse of the fibrocartilaginous material or nucleus pulposus. So that gets into the phases and it affects the blood vessels. So acute spinal cord injuries. So major thing I want to tell you in this is acute spinal cord injuries. When the animal is being presented, put them on a board, the board, and restrain the animal like which is shown in the picture. Don't move them here and there. Restrain it so that it can be moved for X-ray on the same table so that X-ray doesn't have an interference with this board. Oxygenation is very, very important. Don't use methylprednisolone, which is obsolete nowadays. So you don't go with methylprednisolone. So you have to try other therapies which have been put into by the neurologist consensus. So the potential new therapies include your thyrotropin releasing hormones. So this is one. Polyethylene glycol, which is a hydrophilic polymer, and which helps in repairing of the damaged axonal membrane. Bone marrow stem cells, someone can take up this area to work. Transplantation surgeries, this can be used. The olfactory bulb is taken to the spinal cord and it is being used as a treatment protocol. So other drugs which are being used are minocycline, erythropoietin. So you can also go for stimulation, electrical stimulation. So other emerging trials, you can go with vaccinations or monoclonal antibodies. So you can also go with hyperbaric oxygen, autologous macrophages, and mild hypothermia. So there are few that are being studied like atorvastatin, nicotinamide, and melatonin can be tried. So these are the new protocols that have been given by the Neurology Consortium. Okay, so if there is pain, you can use with NSAIDs. If you feel that there is a gastrointestinal differences, then you can go with stop with NSAIDs, and you can go with some patches, opioid patches that are available. So urinary incontinence, we have two things in urinary incontinence. One is the upper motor neuron and the other one is the lower motor neuron. If upper motor neuron is affected, the bladder is going to be it is going to be a big bladder, which is not usually expressed. So upper motor neuron, the bladder is going to be big, and if you're going to press it, it's not going to be expressed. So this is going to be a lower motor lesion. If you press, it's going to be a small bladder and it can be easily pressed. So there was two different ways dealing with urinary incontinences. So upper motor neuron with urinary incontinence may be from the brain or it can be from the lumbar segment. And in case of lower motor neuron, it takes from your S1 and S3 segments, that is by your pelvic nerve and your pudendal nerve, which has got a direct impact on the detrusor muscle, as well as your external urethral sphincters. So drugs that are used are your for this condition, which is used to treat bladder emptying disorders, is like your prazosin, phenylpropylamine, which is the Prion, which is being used, but it's very expensive and available is also very less. Other drugs, betamethasone can be tried, diazepam can be used, azithromycin can be used, tamsulosin can also be tried. So these are few drugs that can be tried in dogs with your urinary incontinence. Myasthenia gravis, you all know, like most of you have dealt with this one. So drug of choice is going to be your anticholinesterase drugs, your pyridostigmine or your neostigmine. You can also go with your prednisolone or the other immunomodulating drugs. I think I took half an hour extra. Maybe any questions you can.
Thank you, madam. Because of the shortage of the time, we will take just a few, one or two important questions. Rest of the questions, I will divert you to your mail address. So, regarding the first question, is Horner syndrome found more in golden retrievers?
Horner syndrome.
Yes. Is Horner syndrome found more in golden retrievers?
Mostly the retrievers group are more prone for this Horner syndrome, like your golden retrievers, your Labrador retrievers are more prone.
Yeah. Another question, madam. Drug of choice for clot found in brain.
Yeah, I think I spoke on it. You can go with streptokinase, or you can go with aspirin drugs or thrombolytic medications that are available. Heparin can also be tried.
Okay. Thank you, madam.